Let's practice like most churches. Most churches, honestly, when you come in, you got to put on that fake smile and pretend everything's great. Let's just pretend for just a moment everything's amazing. Go ahead. You can do that. Go ahead. On three. 1, 2, 3. That's good. You guys aren't playing along. I mean, this side played along. You guys, not so much. So, okay, on three. 1, 2, 3. Best smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's good. And it does help if you put your hands out. I don't know why. It just feels like it does help. Hey, I want to pray for you this morning. But before we do that, I want to remind you that you were given a connection card when you came in. And it's inside your program. If you could take a few moments and fill that out, we would greatly, greatly appreciate it. It really is our opportunity to have a lifeline with you. On the back, you'll find that it says today. If there's a question you have or a prayer request or God says something to you today, you walk out of here and go, you know what, I really needed to hear that. It'd be a great opportunity to put that down. I keep those cards on my desk and pray for you throughout the week. So, important that you hand that in. We'll collect those at the end of our gathering today. So let's pray. Father, thank you for loving us. Thank you that you have a plan for us, even when life goes south on us, even when things are difficult. You can use those things in our lives. You're never surprised by those things. And I pray that today you would help us to understand that no matter what's going on in our lives, you really care for us. Help us to imagine what our lives today can be like because of who you are. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand together and continue. Fordham University is in New York City. Actually, its main campus is in Brooklyn. And if you and I were attending there, we would definitely love the mascot. The mascot is a ram, and a ram sort of symbolizes power. And so one of the things that they allow the student body to do is they allow the student body each year to pick a ram as the mascot, a literal ram. Which sounds like a really cool idea. Now keep in mind, they allow the students to select the ram. Now if you know anything about the meaning of the word sophomore, anybody know what the meaning of the word sophomore is? It means wise moron. Literally, that's really what it means. So if you got a sophomore in your house, my apology to you, or if you've ever been a sophomore, which most of us have been, we have certainly grown out of that. But in 1974, they picked the ram, Ramsey the 24th, actually, and they were surprised because during the second semester, Ramsey the 24th, a ram, gave birth to a lamb. Just so you know, that's not supposed to happen. It wasn't a miracle. What it actually was is the ram was female, not male. And they were asked the question, the people that were in charge of selecting the ram, they were asked the question, what were you thinking? I mean, after all, you can't really have a female ram. That doesn't work. It's like, that's not the way it's supposed to be. And they said this, quote, it had horns, and so we assumed it was a ram. They made a mistake. It's really easy to make mistakes in the way that you and I think, isn't it? It's real easy to make a mistake and to think you really believe something to be true, but you find out it's really not true. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about how it's easy for you and I to be deceived. It's easy for you and I to buy into wrong thinking. It's called self-deception. Here's what someone said about self-deception. They said, man's capacity for self-deception is absolutely, positively unlimited. In other words, you and I have the ability to really be deceived and to buy into it and think we are absolutely 100% right. We've been talking in this series about escaping a new perspective of thinking in your life. We've been talking about helping you to escape wrong thinking issues. Today, I want to help you to analyze whether or not self-deception is running rampant in your life. If you pull out the program this morning, you can follow along with us. Roman numeral number 1 says this: self-deception is difficult to address because it's nearly impossible to see. It's difficult to address because it's nearly impossible to see. Now, probably back about, maybe 20, 25 years ago, so some of you are way too young for this, but about 20, 25 years ago, they brought out those pictures that had all kinds of dots and all kinds of stuff, and if you'd stare at it long enough, a picture would appear to you. I gotta tell you, I have stared at those things for weeks on end, and those pictures have never, ever, ever appeared to me. It's like, I don't think so. I got nothing. But today, I want to give you an opportunity to look at an optical illusion, and I want you to tell me what you see. So if you could put that picture right up there. All right, there it is. So what do you see when you stare up at the screen? There are two options. Let me give you the options. You can either see a rather charming, beautiful-looking woman looking away to the right, or you can see a somewhat depressed older woman staring down toward the ground. How many of you see a beautiful woman raise your hand, be proud about that. How many of you tend to see the older woman looking down on the depressed? How many of you see both of them? Yep, they're both there. If you stare at it long enough, you'll figure it out. If you can't see the older woman, if you look right here, this becomes her chin, this becomes her mouth, that becomes her nose. Now, do you see the older woman that's up there? Keep looking, keep looking, keep looking. I'll send you a copy of it, and all this week you'll be able to stare at it and you'll think, and one of these days, then within an hour, you'll wake up someday and go, I got it! It's amazing! I absolutely see it. They're both there. Trust me. They really are both there. See, and all of a sudden you wake up and you go, okay, now I see it clearly. Here's my goal for you today. My goal for you today is that you would have an experience where you go, I got it. I now see it. You see, the problem with being self-deceived is you don't really know that you're self-deceived. Thus, the meaning of the word self-deception. Turn in your copy of the scriptures this morning at Luke chapter 18. Luke chapter 18, it's on page 732. Luke chapter 18, it's on page 732. Jesus was incredibly good at telling stories. Not just to give a story, but to illustrate something. He called them parables, and he's really good at that, and he tells a story that I want you to see because it'll help you to understand how easy it is to be self-deceived. Luke chapter 18, and we'll pick it up this morning with verse 9. Luke chapter 18 and verse 9. Here's what it says. To some who were confident of their own righteousness, those people that thought they had locked down spirituality, and they looked down on everyone else. In other words, they were great at comparisons. Churches, incidentally, a lot of people that go to church, they're really good at this. Fortunately, at CrossPointe, that's not who we really are. You won't experience that here. Notice what he says next. It says that in verse 10, there were two men that went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee. Now, what you need to know about a Pharisee, they were a religious individual who tended to see themselves as incredibly godly and everybody else as incredibly ungodly. So there are two individuals. One's a Pharisee, the other is a tax collector. Now, you might think of the word tax collector and think of the word IRS. You got to think about 17 times worse than IRS here. Because if you were a tax collector in the day, what you would do is as people would come into the city, you would tax them. And typically what you would do is one for the Roman government, one for me. And so they were incredibly despised. Of all of the citizens in the average city, they'd think, you know what, that guy did not make the top 10 most likely to be liked individuals. So you have these two people. One is a Pharisee, self-righteous, and one is sort of the bottom of the barrel. Here's what it says next. They go into the temple to pray. Verse 11, the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed. God, I thank you that I am not like other people. Whoa, look at me. I got it all together. I'm not like them. I'm not like those people. He goes on to describe those people: robbers, evildoers, adulterers, even like this tax collector. You can just see him pointing over at this tax collector individual. He says, I fast twice a week, and I give a tenth of all that I get. In other words, I got it all together. Then Jesus makes a transition, verse 13. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus concludes by saying this, I tell you this, that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all of those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. The religious man had some severe self-deception in his life. And I wonder, prior to the time that the tax collector went into the temple, if he too had some self-deception in his life. Because it's so easy, especially in our culture today, it's so easy to think, you know what, I bring nothing to the table. Like, how in the world could God love me? Because I got a long list of things that I've done that were wrong, and actually, I'm still struggling with stuff. Anybody in here? Don't raise your hand, just think of that. Although you could raise your hand and point to somebody else, and that would tell us which of those two characters you are. Anybody in here, let me scratch the word anybody, let me just phrase it this way. Everybody in here, to one degree or another, is a struggler. And yet, here's the deal. God is enamored with you. And he really loves you, no matter what you've done in the past, no matter what you're going to do today, and no matter what you're going to do tomorrow. And he says, I can work in your life. Don't be deceived. I can change your life. You see, sometimes we think, you know what, I've got to spruce up my life because after all, I'm going to church. Here's the deal. You come to church so that God can really speak to you, so your life really could be changed. There really are three faces, if you would, of self-deception. I'd like to share those things with you. And then, before we go home today, I want to help you to walk through, okay, now that I know that, what do I do with it? I want to give you some clear steps that you and I can take that will help us to analyze, am I filled with self-deception? And if so, what do I do about that? Let me give you the first face. Self-deception is number one in your notes. Here it is. A person who has a quote-unquote self-righteous spirit. A person who has a quote-unquote self-righteous spirit does not believe he needs to make any life adjustments. In other words, he's saying, I'm fine with the way I am. I got it all together. I checked every box. I do this, I do that, and I don't do this, and I don't do that. I have it all together. I don't know if you're like me, but if you are, and you know anybody like that, what you probably want to do is just sort of go up to that person and tweak them right in the ear. That's what I want to do. I want to sneak up behind them, tweak them right in the ear, and then duck down like, hey, what was that? Nothing. I didn't do anything to you. Because that kind of person tends to be annoying. Have you been annoyed by that person? Don't name names, but you know anybody like that? It's so easy to be like that. Here's what the scriptures say, Galatians chapter 6 and verse 3. The Apostle Paul says this, Galatians chapter 6, verse 3. If anyone thinks they are something, when they are not, they deceive themselves. If you think you have it all together and you really don't, you are deceiving yourself. You're filled with self-deception. You're not properly analyzing who you really are. The scriptures are really clear that every one of us is messed up to one degree or another. Romans chapter 3 and verse 23 says this, for all have sinned, everybody in here, everybody out there, everybody you know, everybody has sinned. We all missed the mark. He goes on to say, and they fall short of the glory of God. In other words, God has a standard. The standard's here. It's not here, it's here. And nobody in this room, or nobody in your neighborhood, or nobody at your place of work, or nobody in your school meets the standard. We all miss the mark. The good news is that when you realize that you missed the mark, then you can allow God to really change your heart. You and I have to be very careful because sin is deceptive. And sometimes we can think, you know what I'm doing is not really wrong. And God goes, you know what, I have a different idea about that. And honestly, it's not an opinion. See, God doesn't have opinions about what you ought to do. He has standards, and he says, look, I love you, but I don't want you to mess up your life. So therefore, I'm asking that you allow me to work in your life and allow me to change you on the inside. Because when you change on the inside, your actions on the outside are going to change. That's the first face of deception. There is a second one. Here's the second one. It's also in your notes, number 2. A person who has a captured by sinful habit spirit. Captured by sinful habit spirit does not believe that life adjustments are possible. Does not believe that life adjustments are even possible. Now, honestly, there probably aren't a whole lot of the first group of people in here, but I'll guarantee you that some of us fit into the second camp. The second camp means that there's something or some things that have captured us and are messing us up, and we believe a lie. The lie is this: you can't change. Get used to it, because that's who you are. It's your wiring. You can't change. And what God says about that, he says that's bogusly wrong. It's not right thinking. You and I definitely can change. God's desire for every person in here, for every person out there, is that we and they have a relationship, a life-changing relationship with him. Actually, that's what Paul said to young Timothy when he wrote to him. He's the pastor of the church of Ephesus. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, listen to this. 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 3 says, this is good. And you go, okay, what is this? It's referring back to the fact that he was praying for people. He was praying for authorities. He was praying for people that they would become godly, that they would have peace, and that they would live holy lives. And God says, that is a good thing. And then he says, and it pleases God, our Savior, who wants, catch this, all people to be saved and to come to a knowledge of him. He wants to have a relationship with anybody. Aren't you glad today that you don't have to straighten up your life to get in the door? You don't have to straighten up your life to have a relationship with God. You come to God and say, look, I got some issues in my life, and I know that you really care about me. I know that you sent Jesus to die for me so that I get this amazing relationship with you. And so I'm coming to you exactly as I am. There was a man named Zacchaeus who also happened to be a tax collector. He's the lowlife of his city. And it says this in Luke chapter 19, in the city of Jericho. Jesus enters the city of Jericho, and everybody and their brother wants to see him, including Zacchaeus. So you go, well, why would the biggest sinner in town be interested in seeing the one that many people are hoping was the God-man, was the Messiah? Why would he want to see him? Here's why. Because he wanted to find some kind of hope. He wanted to find some kind of hope that he too could change. But honestly, he doubts that he really can change, but he's checking it out. If you might remember, if you know the story, if you grew up going to church, you might remember that he was a short man. Remember the little song, "A wee little man was he"? Nobody wants to be called a wee little man. Sounds like you got a urination problem right there. A wee little man was he. And so what does he do? He climbs up into a sycamore tree, and then something pretty amazing happens. As Jesus is walking by the man, it says in verse 5 of Luke chapter 19, that when Jesus reached the spot that Zacchaeus was up in the tree, he says to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. I want to have this amazing relationship with you. I want to spend time with you." And so if you find yourself today in that particular camp, that you've been captured by sin and or sins, he says this: I want to spend time with you in your house today. Now, incidentally, what happens next, the religious people do what a lot of religious people do. They begin to mutter. And it says this. What were they muttering about? It says they're muttering because he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. They're going, "Hey, what about us? What about us?" Which tells you what camp they were in. They're in the first camp. They're in the Pharisee camp. They're in the "I'm really okay" camp. Jesus said this. He said, "Look, the sick need a physician. I'm the physician. I have come to help the sick." And he wasn't defining sick in that case as a literal sickness. He's saying, I have come to help people that are bogged down in sin, that their lives are messed up, and they know it. So I got good news for you today. Here it is. If your life is messed up, you are a prime candidate to follow Jesus. That's the deal. And most likely, let's just be honest this morning, if you think you really have it all together and you're here sort of checking out, is the Jesus the real deal or not, you're probably not going to be too interested in following him. Because in order to follow him, You got to get to the point where you go, I got some messiness in my life, and I'm willing to submit to him, to follow after him, because I need my life to change. There is a third grouping of people that tend to fall into that self-deception issue. Here it is. It's number 3 in your notes. A person who has a quote-unquote, and I'm not as bad as most people mindset. You know any of those? That I'm not as bad as most people mindset believes that he or she can simply tweak his or her life on his or her own and they will be fine. It's just a little tweak that I want to make. I mean, I'm not really all that messed up. I mean, compared to them, I'm really pretty good. I mean, let's be honest. Have you ever done the pecking order thing? You go into your place of work, your neighborhood, and you look around and you go, well, I'm sort of here, and there's people here, and there's only a couple of people that are better than me. God says to you, look, if in fact you've worked through a lot of issues in your life, it's only because you've allowed me, God, to take care of those things. He really does care about you. He really does love you. And if you're here today, I mean, honestly, of the 3 camps, there probably aren't a whole lot of people in the first camp. I'll guarantee you in the room there are some people in the second camp. Every one of us, by the way, if you're not in the second camp, I guarantee you used to be in the second camp. And the only reason you're not in the second camp is because of him, not because of you. It's because of him that he's changed your life. But after you've begun to follow Jesus for any length of time, one of the things that tends to happen is we tend to think, I got it together now. I'm okay now. I just need a little bit of tweaking. And I can work out the tweaking in my life. Here's the deal. You can't change your life on your own. Not going to happen. That's the bad news. Here's the good news. God says, but I can change your life. I can radically change your life. So how in the world is that going to happen? What do you do to make sure that you're not buying into deceptive thinking? And if you are, how do you get out of it? If you can't see it and you got it, how in the world do you get out of it? I want to give you some walk-away principles. One will build upon the previous one. So we're going to go here and here and here and here. I'll guarantee you, if you walk through these principles on a regular basis, your life will change. Let me give them to you. Here they are. The first one is this. It's under Roman numeral 2, God's plan to escape self-deception. God has a plan so you can escape self-deception. Here's the first principle. Understand your natural heart condition. Understand your natural heart condition. Understand your natural heart condition. Now, most of us, if not all of us, have been to the doctors, and when you go in there, no matter what's going on with you, you could have a broken toe, and you know what they're going to do? They're going to listen to your heart. They're going, it's not here, it's there. And you're thinking, why do they do that? I'm going to give you a secret. They do that so they can charge you more money. No, that's not the secret. They want to make sure that you understand, even if your toe is broken, if your heart's going bad, we don't have to worry about your toe. We got to fix your heart. The same thing is true in the spiritual arena. Your heart, the core of who you really are. What's your heart like? Well, here's what Jeremiah chapter 17 and verse 9 says. Listen to this, and it describes me, and it also describes you. The heart is deceitful above all things. In other words, it's deceptive. The heart is deceitful above all things. And then it goes beyond that and says, and it's beyond cure. In other words, you can't fix it. That's the bad news, which leads to rather good news. It's the second principle. The first being, understand your natural heart condition. The second is this. Ask God to give you a clear understanding of your heart. Ask God to give you a clear understanding of your heart. Now, we had a week or so ago, we had somewhat of a storm that rolled through and a lot of power went down. I called my mom and got on her cell phone and she said, well, yeah, we don't have any lights. My mom's a Pennsylvania Dutch kind of person, and so when you talk to her, it's sort of, it's always an experience. I said, well, Mom, do you have any, you got any flashlights? And she goes, well, I do have some flashlights, but apparently the batteries, that's how you say that word, by the way, the batteries don't work. She didn't look at the flashlight and go, you know, there must be something wrong with this thing. It's the outside. It won't turn on. No, she understood it's an internal issue. It's an internal issue. You and I have to understand that it's not about working on the externals. See, what we tend to do is we tend to think, well, I do have a couple things going on in my life, so I got to fix those actions. I got an attitude, I got a verbal issue. I'm going to fix those things. Wrong way. You got to fix your heart. As you fix your heart, then your outer actions are going to be changed. Jesus said this, Matthew chapter 15, verse 18, not in your notes, by the way. He said this, but the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart. In other words, you got to understand what you're like on the inside. You got to understand that. Now, God says this to you in Jeremiah chapter 17 and verse 10. We looked at Jeremiah chapter 17 and verse 9, which said basically your heart is messed up. Verse 10 says this, I, the Lord, will search the heart. I'll examine your mind. I will search the heart. I will examine your mind. So you and I have got to decide, okay, God, I really want to hear from you what I'm really like. You go, I don't know if I'm too much into that because that might not go well. That doesn't sound like a great meeting that I want to go to. How about you? But God goes, you know what? Until you understand what you do bring to the table and what you don't bring to the table, you'll never change. And yet he really wants to change you. And when he points something out to you, he doesn't point something out to you to just start poking you in the chest. You got any friends that tend to do that? They're pokers. They just poke you. And you're going, you know what? Quit poking me. I don't want to be poked. God's not a poker. Gently tap you on the shoulder and go, hey, we need to work on that. We need to work on that. So what does that look like? How do you start? Here's the third principle this morning. See God as the direction giver and authority of your life. Your heart's messed up to one degree or another. You and I then have to see God as the direction giver and the authority of your life. A couple of months ago, Carol and I went down to Washington, D.C. You been there lately? Anybody been to D.C. lately? Here's a lot of cool stuff that's going on in D.C. And so we went down to the mall area and where all the Smithsonians are. And if you haven't been there for a long time, you're going, wow. I mean, we got a half a day. Where are we going to go? And so what we decided to do is that we would go into the information center. And we went into the information center, and sure enough, there is an information center desk. And there are information center people behind the information center desk. And so we worked our way up there, and we talked to Mrs. Information. And we said, look, Mrs. Info, if you only had 4 or 5 hours, what would you go to? And she goes, oh, what I would do is I would go down here, and I would hit that museum and this way. And I said, well, how do you get there? She goes, oh, it's really simple. You go down here, go that way, go this way. You're going to see a little white puppy on the corner. Turn left there. And I'm going, you know what? You lost me when you started by saying you go down here. I did not follow along with where she was telling me to go. And then she did something that I thought was amazing. In our culture that is really hooked on our phones. How many of you would honestly say, you know what, I got a phone addiction? How many? You got one? I mean, like if my phone dies, I die. That's my rule of thumb. You know, if my phone dies, I can't find anything. I don't know anybody's phone number anymore. I don't even know Carol's phone number anymore. I just hit Carol and poof, it calls her. It's amazing. She pulled out something I hadn't seen for a while. It's called paper. And this piece of paper had a map, M-A-P, a map on it, and she got out a little highlighter, and she highlighted the direction and said, you got to go here, you got to go there, you got to go here. There's the puppy, and then turn left there, and you're going to be fine. And I thought, wow, that's what I need. Here's what God says to you. I want to give you direction, but you have got to understand I'm the authority. I know where you should go. You're at point A. I want to get you to point B. That's where you really need to go. Are you willing to follow my direction? Because I could have taken that little piece of paper, and I could have gone, you know what, I know that's what it says, but I think there's a better way to go. Now, Carol, fortunately for me, has a great sense of direction. I honestly could get lost going from here out that door to the restroom. I could get lost somehow just doing that. No sense of direction. You and I, spiritually speaking, on our own, based on our hearts, don't really have a good sense of direction. However, God says, look, I'll give you direction. But you're going to have to decide I'm the authority and you're not. Most of us, probably either in your car or on your phone, you got a GPS unit, right? When you're going to travel from point A to point B and you've never been to point B, what do? You turn it on. Now, I got to tell you, sometimes I don't know who your person in the box is in the GPS, but mine is Homer Simpson, which makes driving really sort of fun because every once in a while he just says these bizarre things to you. He'll be driving along, and it'll be like 382 miles to go, and he'll go, let's stop for ice cream, and go on. I like you, Homer. I like the way that you think. It'll come up, and it'll say, you know what, you got to make a sharp left-hand turn next. And then he'll say this, go ahead, just yank the wheel. You can do it. I'm not making this up. That's really my GPS unit. But you see, sometimes Homer gets lost. I know he shouldn't, but let's be honest, he's Homer. And he'll tell me, turn left, and you're going, if I do that, I'll be in a lake, Homer. That is not ever going to work. Here's the thing. God as your authority, God as your direction giver, never says turn left, you're going to go into a lake. It doesn't work that way. He has a plan. He knows where you are. He knows where he wants to take you. You and I have to decide, am I going to point out to him? Am I going to say, hey, I'm going to be the leader? Or are you going to say, he's my authority, I'm willing to follow him? Here's what the scriptures say. Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 24, interesting verse. It says, a person's steps are directed by the Lord. In other words, he's going to give you the steps to take. He's going to direct your steps. And then it says in that same verse, how then can anyone understand their own way? The answer is, you can't. There's another great verse found in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 21. Listen to these words. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, quote unquote, this is the way, walk in it. Wouldn't it be great if when you were lost, there was a voice that said, go left, go right? Wouldn't that be a great thing? Here's the deal. God says in your life, I will give you clear direction. I will help you to think correctly so that you can get to where you really need to go. The question is, will you and I decide, God, you're my authority, I'm going to listen to you or not? If you do decide that, then you got to go, how will I know? How will I know what direction to go in? There are two primary things that you need to do. I'm going to give them to you next. It's number 4 and 5. Here's number 4. Learn his principles. You and I have got to decide, I will learn his principles. He's in charge. I'm not. Learn his principles. Let me ask you a question. When you were in middle school and high school, how many of you really enjoyed reading? Let me see your hands. Just raise your hand. All right, so there's 7 of us. The rest of us are borderline dumb. Okay, I was in the borderline dumb camp, okay? I mean, I'm thinking, you know what? Books are to hold doors open. You just stack them up there and the door stays open. As a sophomore in high school, I decided I wanted to be an electrician. Didn't know a whole lot about being an electrician, but thought it would be sort of a cool thing to do because you could shock people, and that'd be sort of fun. And so I went to Votech. And I got there, and the instructor would expect that we would actually read the book. And I'm going, when do we get to the wiring? I just want to wire stuff, man. I want to blow stuff up. I'm a sophomore. Wise moron. See how that works? And he said, you know, you got to do this. You got to do this. You got to do this. And then one day he comes into the lab, and he goes, he has something like this. And he goes, Short, got a question for you. Why is it that the ground prong here, see you got a hot and a cold and a ground prong right there, why is it that that is longer than the other 2? And I'm thinking, I don't know. You know why I don't know? I never read the book. And I'm thinking now he's about to tell me, because that's your job. You're the instructor, and by definition, instructors should instruct. But he says to me, read the book. And I'm thinking, I don't want to read the book. I'm thinking somehow or another it's just going to fly into my head, and I will know what I ought to do. Next 3 days, he'd come in and ask me every day, well, Short, I'm going, I don't know. And he said the same thing. Read the book. And I'm thinking, I ain't reading the book. Somehow or another, I'm going to fall asleep, and I'm going to wake up and go, oh, I got it. I never did get it until I finally did what? Read the book. And here's what I found. The reason that it's longer, it actually makes sense. You thought, I'm going to learn some principle about electricity today when I go to church. Yes, it's going to be life-changing. Here it is. The reason that it's longer than the hot and the cold is that way it's grounded before the electricity is really flowing. That makes sense. That way you don't die. Which is always something I valued, figuring out how to not die. Here's the principle. You and I, we have to learn the principles. Now, let me ask you a question. How are you going to learn the principles? You need to read the book. See how that works? You go, okay, if I read the book, what am I going to learn? Here's what it says, Psalm chapter 119 and verse 9. Listen to these words. Psalm chapter 119, verse 9. How can a young person stay on the path of purity? How can a young person stay on the path of purity? You go, why is he picking on young people? Because it is so difficult. Let's be honest. It is so difficult to be a kid because you don't have wisdom from years of messing up like the rest of us. And so you're a rookie at learning how to live life. And yet he says, listen to this again, how can a young person stay on the path of purity? By living according to your word, because they have done what? They have read the book. And then he goes on to say this, so therefore I'll seek you with all of my heart. I won't stray from your commands. I will hide your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. You and I have got to know what this book says. You got to learn it. You got to live it. You got to apply it. It's incredibly important for you and for me to understand what the book says. Now, here's my guarantee to you. Every time you come to CrossPointe, we will dive into the book because, quite frankly, I might be able to teach you a principle about electricity and how not to die this afternoon. But I have zippo nothing when it comes to helping you to understand, apart from God's word, how you ought to get through life. If that's what you're looking for, and you ever come here on a Sunday and we don't open the book, I've wasted your time. And I'll guarantee you that every time you do come, you will be able to use what you have heard within 22 minutes of leaving this place. Apply what you're learning. Learn it and live it. That's the principle. So you and I have got to understand, okay, God does have a plan. I've got to read the book to know the plan. Make sense? But there's another step. Here it is, number 5. Listen to his voice daily. You and I have got to listen to God's voice daily. Now, let's be honest this morning. We all hear voices in our heads. We do. I don't know about you, but I distract rather easily. Anybody else in that camp? Yeah, like if I'm someplace, like I know some people love Starbucks. Starbucks lovers, let me see your hands. Yeah, and it's easy to go to Starbucks and sort of hang out, and I can take my laptop in there. But if there's a conversation over here, and I'm not a snooty, nosy person, but if there's a conversation happening behind me, you know what I begin to do? I'm listening to that conversation. Then there's one over here, and I'm trying to listen to that. And then there's one over here, and I'm going, ah! I have to take Valium just to get into Starbucks and survive. Because there's all of these voices. All right, here's the key question. Let's be honest. This is a hand-raising question, by the way. How many of you talk to yourself? Let me see your hands. You talk to yourself. Yeah. The rest of you, yeah, I saw that, Paul. You're raising your hand for you. You're going, yes, I heard you. You do talk to yourself. All right, now you don't have to raise your hand on this one. How many of you answer yourself when you talk to yourself? Because that shows true brilliance right there. Yeah. There's all kinds of voices that are out there. Here is the problem, though. Most of the time, we don't pay attention. For those of us that are married, I'm going to give you a tip. Here it is. This is for free. If you really want to have a better relationship with your wife or husband, you got to learn to do one thing. You know what it's called? Listen. You know why most marriages, you know why most relationships don't work? It's because all we do is talk. I got to help this person understand me. And we don't listen. Here's the principle. You and I have got to learn how to listen to God because he really does want to speak to you. You go, okay, I'm going to read the book. Is that it? No, that's not it. No, you got to read the book so you can learn the principles. But Jesus said something rather amazing. Easter is about to roll around. April 1st, by the way, is Easter. You'll want to be here. It's going to be good. He said, look, that the disciples, they had been with him about 3 years or so, and he says, look, I'm going to leave you. And they're going, what? What? He goes, yeah, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. They're going to hang me on a cross. I'm going to be placed in a tomb. 3 days later, I'm going to rise from the dead. And they go, okay, that's good. It ends well. And then he says, and I'm going to ascend up to my heavenly Father, and I'm going to spend the rest of eternity with him up there. And they're going, wait, whoa, hold the bus. Whoa. We want to be, we need you because you tell us what to do. You give us insight. And then he says something incredibly amazing to them. He says, but don't worry. John chapter 14, he says, I'm going to ask my Father, and he's going to give you, quote unquote, another advocate. John chapter 14, verse 16. He's going to give you another advocate who will be with you, catch this, forever. Then he says, I will not leave you as orphans. Most of us don't have a firm understanding of what it would be like to be an orphan because honestly in our culture there aren't many orphans. Here's the thing, if you were an orphan, you're on your own. You got to provide for yourself. And honestly, you don't have to worry about getting to tomorrow. You're just trying to get through today because you don't really know what to do. And he says, I'm not going to leave you as an orphan. I am going to send somebody. We're going to find out that it's the Holy Spirit of God himself who's going to indwell you, who's going to speak to you. And he says in John chapter 16 and verse 13 this, he says, when he, the Spirit of truth, will come, he will guide you into all truth. He'll help you to live out the book. That makes sense? He's going to speak to you. You and I need to learn how to really listen. So here's the question. How in the world do you do that? Because you're going, it sounds a little like, whoa, I don't know how to do that, man. How do you? Because let's be honest, reading the book, pretty simple, right? You pick it up. It's there. But how in the world do you listen to God's Spirit? How do you do that? John chapter 14, 15, and 16. Jesus says this Holy Spirit is going to be your guide, your counselor, and your teacher. To do that, he's going to need to be able to speak to you, and you're going to need to be able to listen to him. So how in the world do you do that? Let me ask you this. If I were to ask you, push you in the corner and say, give me your definition of what it means to pray, what would you tell me? Well, for most of us, if we're really honest, it'd be sort of like a shopping list, right? I mean, if you're going to go down here to Kenny's and get your shopping stuff done, you probably have a list. That tends to be how we pray. We go, well, God, I got this going on and this going on and this going on. What if you began to look at prayer differently? What if you began to look at prayer as a two-way street? Because here's the principle. You might want to write this verse down. It's not in your notes. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 17. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 17. It's on page 826. If you have a Bible like the ones we give out in the back. If you don't have a Bible, by the way, grab one on your way out. Our gift to you, absolutely free. Here's what it says. 2-word verse. Ready? Pray continually. Pray continually. So what in the world does that mean? It means that what if you took the time to say, God, I really need to have this conversation with you, because prayer is a two-way street, not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. What if you began to do these two simple things that I'm about to give to you, because I think it would help you to understand how God wants to speak to you. What if every morning you woke up and you said, God, I don't know what today's going to hold, but I really need you to speak to me about whatever I'm going to encounter. God, will you speak to me today about whatever I'm going to encounter? If you do that, I really believe the Holy Spirit is going to speak to you. He's going to lead you. What if at the end of the day, you go before God again and you pray and you say, God, was there anything I did today that I messed up on? God, I really need to hear from you. And I believe he'll really speak to you. See, it's about reading the book. It's about learning to really listen. It's about reading the book. It's about learning to really listen. There's one more principle. Honestly, the first 5, really good. You got to understand those things. But if you don't get number 6, you'll never do the first 5. Here it is. Number 6. Determined to live in agreement with his principles and his voice. Determined to live in agreement with his principles and his voice. Live in agreement with his principles and his voice. I began to follow Jesus when I was a sophomore in high school. And my 8th grade year, my freshman year in high school, not what you'd like to call very good, because I thought, you know what? Hey, I'm in 8th grade. I can decide for myself. One of the things I decided, remember I told you I didn't really like to read? I decided I didn't really like school. I decided school sort of ought to be optional. And if you don't feel like going, you shouldn't have to go. That's what I decided. Now, my mom and dad were in total disagreement with that. But I decided, since I was in charge, that from time to time, my 8th grade year, I skipped school about 25 days. Don't tell my mother, by the way, because she still doesn't know it. So if you run into her, you say, how will I know if it's your mother? Oh, she'll be talking like this. Well, how you doing now, Bunch? So that'll be my mom. So if you hear somebody talking like that, do not tell her what I just told you, that I skipped school about 25 days. Why did I skip school? I didn't like going. Now, if my mom and dad would have heard that, they'd have gone, hey, there is a spot on your body that God has provided that we're going to warm up so that you get it. Yeah, that's right. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be comfortable. I'm going to take some swats to the hind end, and it's not going to be a good experience for anyone. Here's the thing. I thought, you know what? I'm my own authority. I can figure out my life on my own. God says to you, look, I'm the authority. I will give you direction. I will give you loving direction. I know where you are. I know where you need to go. Here's the question. Will you follow me? Because unless you make that decision, you're not going to read the book. If you do read the book, you're certainly not going to apply it to your life. And when he speaks to you, you're going to go, doo-doo-doo, I don't want to hear you. I don't want to hear you. I don't want to hear you. You and I have got to understand that he wants to be your authority. He wants to take care of you. There's a great verse, Psalm 119, 165. There's a lot of verses in that chapter, the longest chapter in the Bible, Psalm 119, verse 165. Here's what it says. Great peace have those who love your law. They love the principles in the book. They're going to have peace. And nothing can make them stumble. When you live by the principles, when you listen to the Spirit, you won't stumble. And therefore, he says in verse 168, therefore I obey your precepts and your statutes, the principles that are in there, the things that you say to me, I will do them. He says, for all my ways are known by you. God, you know what I'm like. You know where I'm at. You have good intentions for me. You have my best heart interests in your mind. Are you going to trust him? Really, that's what it comes down to. Are you going to trust him? Not just on a Sunday morning. Are you going to trust him Monday afternoon at 2? Are you going to trust him Thursday evening at 7? Are you going to trust him? Because otherwise, I'll guarantee you, self-deception will come into your life and you'll convince yourself it's okay to do what I want to do. And you won't change. Will you trust him? Do you recognize, hey, you know what, on my own, I'm not going to make it. My heart can easily be filled with self-deception. But if I listen to him, recognize he's my authority, if I read the book, apply the principles, if I listen to his Spirit, you know what's going to happen? He's going to guide me. He's going to guide me. He's going to take care of me every step of the way. God wants to do some amazing stuff in your life. He wants you to know today that you can trust him. Here's the simple truth at the end of the note. Self-deception is impossible to see on your own. It's impossible to see on your own, but can be eradicated by choosing to live by God's direction. It can be eradicated by choosing to live by God's direction. He wants to give you direction today. Will you take it? Will you take it? Because God's not going to grab you by the scruff of the neck and go, hey, hey! He wants you to willfully, freely follow him. Because you have a relationship with him and you know he can be trusted. Pray with me this morning, will you? Father, I really do thank you that you love us as we are, that you care for us, that you do amazing stuff in our lives as we surrender to you, as we decide we can trust you. And God, I pray that you'd speak to each person here today. Would you take a moment where you are? And would you just go before God and say, God, I need you to speak to me. Would you be willing to say to him, God, I want you to be my authority. I want you to give me the direction that I need. God, help me to trust you. Would you be willing to do that today? If so, why don't you tell him that? Why don't you tell him that? Take a moment and just do business with God right now.